You know what time of year it is. It's Halloween. The name's ZuriKey. Don't wear it out. And, well, I just got done trick-or-treating. And not to flex, not to brag or anything, but I got a lot of candy. My costume was pretty sick, not even gonna lie to you. Anyways, I didn't actually look at the candy I got, so, let's do that right now. Drum roll, please. Think I went to the wrong house. When you think of a video game, what kind of shape comes to mind? For most of you, the answer to that question would probably look something like this. A plastic case with a disc inside. I mean, that is the standard. Wait. You know what? I just can't do it. Before you could actually just store all the games you owned on the system itself, you had to physically own the game. Before discs, CDs, and digital downloads, we had cartridges. Video game cartridges are so iconic, man. I mean, sure, putting a disc in or just pressing a button to play a game is cool and all, but something about holding a game cartridge in your hands, pressing it down into your console, and then slamming that fat, voluptuous start button is just really satisfying. So let's take a look at the evolution of video game cartridges and dive into just why we stopped using them. Now, cartridges have been around since forever, not even just in video games. But eventually, when all the cool kids left the arcade and started playing games at home, there needed to be a way to play games at home. Starting with the Channel F, developed by the company Fairchild, this was one of the first consoles to actually include cartridges in order to play games. Before that, you had the Magnavox Odyssey, the first video game console ever made, which, yeah, I don't even think this needs cartridges. Well, to be fair, the Magnavox had cartridges, but they didn't actually have games on them. Essentially, what would happen is that you would put a cartridge into the system, and the cartridge would tell the system what to display. Just a bunch of dots on your screen that somewhat resembled the game that was on it. So everything you need to play any of these games is already baked into the console itself. You just need the cart to tell the console what to display. Pretty simple technology. The Channel F actually featured ROM cartridges. Cartridges with actual information on them, and not just commands for the console. And that led us here. Atari. Atari 2600 cartridges are definitely a start, with this no-nonsense rectangular shape that just screams video games. And this is the design that most companies at the time would try to replicate. Sure, you got the Coleco Telestar arcade cartridges, but you know, we'll just leave them to themselves. A lot of the cartridges you'll see being used for systems at this time either followed in Atari's footsteps or did something completely different, usually to less success. But eventually these companies realized this was the definitive design and stopped doing weird stuff. This cart design is great though. It's not too big but not too small, and there's an end label making it easy to display on a bookshelf or something. Fast forward a few years of similar design, and now we're in the third generation, the Nintendo Famicom and NES. Yeah, I know, I talk about the Famicom a lot, but I mean, how couldn't I? It did so many things right. For instance, its cartridges. Nintendo went for a more horizontal design as opposed to Atari's vertical carts, with little indents at the bottom of each side for the pin connectors. Same story for the NES, but now they're actually vertical. But man, look at the NES cartridges. Come on, this is a video game. There is absolutely no room for misinterpretation. The NES cartridges are super tall though, which I never really understood why. Famicom cartridges have 60 pins at the bottom, while NES cartridges have 72. The extra pins in the NES cartridges were for lockout chips, or chips that recognize when a cartridge is unlicensed or bootlegged, and any other expansion quirks involving sound and memory. Besides that though, inside these things are the exact same deal. In fact, sometimes Nintendo would just put the insides of a Famicom cartridge into an NES cartridge with the 60 pin to 70 pin converter in there. Now on the right we have an iconic American video game cartridge design, and on the left we have an iconic Eastern cartridge design. And to be honest, I gotta go with the Famicom on this one. There's just something so cool about these cartridges. They came in all different colors and formats, which is just awesome. I will admit though that it's sometimes hard to tell what is a game for the Famicom and what isn't because of this. With Nintendo's games, you usually never got an end label, which makes storing these games fun. But then other companies will put end labels on their games, and then it's just a whole world of inconsistency. Every NES cartridge, besides a few outliers, had the exact same shell. Always in gray, always this tall with a special label on the front. If you had an NES cartridge that even slightly differentiated from this, well, you had a pirate game. But with that, there really is no confusion over what game is for the NES and what game isn't. Here we have Sega with their Master System cartridges, and looking at this, no design, no art, no end labels? It's so boring. I've never been so uninterested looking at a Sonic game in my life. Who pissed in Sega's coffee that morning? They really said, "You see, here at Sega, we pride ourselves on absolutely nothing." With Game Boy cartridges, you could tell that they were trying to replicate the look and feel of an NES cartridge, only now portable. And yeah, they're small, tiny, and portable alright. These carts stayed this way for a while until the Game Boy Advance, where they took this design. I don't really have any gripes with it, it's actually pretty nostalgic. One cool thing they did is that with their NES Classics line of games, where they would take classic NES games and port them to the GBA, was that the cartridges would semi-replicate the original NES cartridges, with the carts being gray instead of the regular GBA black. Now we're at the console wars between the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And I gotta say, both cart designs really reflect the vibe both companies were putting off at the time. Sega advertised themselves as a bit more edgy than Nintendo, a little less family friendly, more for teenagers who just needed blood in their fighting games. Nintendo, on the other hand, was generally a family company. Most of their flagship titles were very child oriented in nature. I mean, who would you trust your kid alone in a room with? Super Mario World or Altered Beast? Kirby Superstar or Splatterhouse 2? See, I mean, it all came down to the fact that Sega's Mortal Kombat had blood and Nintendo's didn't. That was all enough for Sega to take a decent amount of market share away from the Italian plumber. And you can really see that in their cartridges. Sega's cartridges were just darker. In the beginning, the label template looked like this, with the Genesis logo at the bottom with a black and white checkerboard pattern. Then later down the line, they put the Genesis logo to the top left and changed it to red. Genesis cartridges feel more edgy and mature. Super Nintendo cartridges, yeah, get this baby stuff out of my face. Just kidding, I love this SNES design. I think both truly fit the target audience they were aiming at. It's just the end labels on both of these carts are kinda meh. A weird quirk of both of these systems is that with their end labels, you don't always know what you're gonna get. Like the Famicom, they're inconsistent. Most SNES end labels are fine, albeit the font changes a little bit too much for my liking. With the Sega Genesis carts, it's mostly the same story, but it's also not. Sometimes carts use the default font, sometimes they'll use logos, sometimes they're Sonic 2. This tiny logo, how am I supposed to see that from afar? The Nintendo 64, one of the few systems in this generation to actually still use cartridges. At this point in time, the competition like Sony's PS1, they were using discs, which at the time just made more sense than using cartridges. PS1 games were cheaper because of this, which ultimately led Sony to dominate this generation. I don't know, I think Nintendo did some junk with Philips.
Hey you! Get off of my cloud! It's been one of those days.
And those use CDs. But yeah, because of Nintendo's stubbornness, the N64 suffered as CDs were way easier for third parties to develop for. Years later, the same thing happened with the Wii U, a console that could definitely run most games of its generation. But nobody wanted to figure out how to develop for the thing. So what about the cartridges themselves? They're great, but they're horrible. N64 cartridges are a little quirky looking. They're curved and small, which is actually a design I really like. But no end labels? Nintendo, it is 1996. I thought we left this with the Famicom. So me and my sister are 2000s babies, and when I showed her a Game Boy cartridge for the first time, she was freaked out by how big it was. That's because we grew up on the DS with these tiny little cartridges. I mean, it was a more modern age. We can't be using these thick cartridges anymore. Looking at this just makes me think of losing my DS in the middle of the mall. True story. Not much to say about this design though. It's small, compact, and just screams nostalgia for anyone born around my time. Now this small, compact design would become the standard for handhelds, as at this point home consoles had long abandoned the cartridge format for disc and CDs. The PS Vita used carts similar to the DS, albeit a little skinnier. And then, boom, the Nintendo Switch. Yeah, when the Nintendo Switch launched, people found out scarily soon that these cartridges taste horrible. It has this really bitter taste to it that was put there to prevent little kids from swallowing cartridges. Great idea, but man, this just leaves one heck of an aftertaste. Not even water containment. And yeah, that's the evolution of video game cartridges. But why did we switch to CDs anyway? Well, not only can they hold more space, have better music, etc, etc, cartridges were just a pain to use. 9 out of 10 times when you plug a cartridge in, it won't work because the pins are dirty. So then you gotta take the cartridge out, blow your heart out, put it back in and hope it works.
Usually that does the trick, but if it didn't, then you're gonna have to bust out the Q-tip and 91% alcohol.
With discs and CDs, you usually don't have to worry about it. They come with plastic cases which you're meant to keep and not throw away like cartridge boxes. So there's really no reason why your discs shouldn't work unless they're scratched. And trust me, being the kid with scratched game discs and DVDs is not fun. Trust me, I was there.
So now, cartridges are just relegated to handhelds, which I guess I'm okay with. I mean, putting a disc in or just pressing a game on a menu just isn't the same as plugging one piece of technology into another, but I mean, I'll get over that.